Since we will be dealing with such a serious and profound subject, let us start at the outset by dismantling a delusion. Namely, that the so popular book Kybalion is not a classical Hermetic text, despite the speculatively indicated authorship of the three initiates. The work was written at the very beginning of the 20th century by the American lawyer William Walker Atkinson, who, after managing to heal himself from cancer by changing his mental attitude, became heavily involved in the topic of the power of thought. In Kybalion, Atkinson combined his newly found interest in Hermeticism with his old preference for Hinduism and his desire to deliver a message in a more modern language. It is good that he draws attention to this ancient wisdom. But in essence, his book is not Hermeticism revived, but rather standard popular esotericism. There is nothing wrong with this, but it is wrong to define the 7 laws he gave as Hermetic principles. However, a few small quotations from the actual Hermetic texts are also partially used in Kybalion, and surely readers who wish to dig deeper could continue their study and find them. There are many so-called Hermetic texts, and the chosen name of their author can also tell us a lot about them. The Greek god Hermes is declared an initiate in the Egyptian mysteries, although he has a close enough Egyptian equivalent, namely Thoth. And in fact, this reveals to us the real picture. The writings were born precisely during the Hellenization of Egyptian culture. They are influenced by Platonism and Stoicism, but also use the old priestly wisdom of the Nile Valley. The texts that can be attributed to this group are many and unsynthesized, but the most valuable in them was sifted out in the 2nd and 3rd century by the Gnostics and the Alexandrian school. Their compilations have survived to this day, including through Arabic translations, and we can get acquainted with the essence of Hermeticism reflected figuratively and mystically in the popular Corpus Hermeticum and the Emerald tablet, or Tabula Smaragdina, which should by no means be confused with speculative contemporary works about or from Thoth the Atlantean, which claim to be related to the classical emerald plate, but as something entirely different. It is in the latter work that one of the most famous Hermetic principles is found, namely, as above, so below. But in the Hermetic tradition itself, there is no differentiation of distinct fundamental laws. Even on the contrary, the context is very important, in places even ritualistic, so as to support the raising of the soul, described at the beginning of Hermes' dialogue with Pymander, who personifies the spirit. It is not for nothing that Hermes, the mediator between gods and men, is chosen as the bearer of this tradition. His motto was, "Honor God by standing still before him." The Bogomols and the Cathars used the Hermetic texts, and it was no coincidence that they began their gatherings with the call of, "Let us stand still before God." The Latin translation of the Corpus Hermeticum by Marsilio Ficino became possible precisely after a collection in Greek was given to him by Bogomol clergymen. And although superficial researchers define Bogomolism, this forerunner of the Renaissance, as dualism, and Hermeticism as an ambassador of unity, both actually seek union with the spirit in a similar way. Hermes says, and therefore, of all the creations of nature, only man is dual, namely, mortal according to his body and immortal according to the spiritual seed living in him. Doesn't this, however, contradict the above principle of the correspondence of the heavenly and the earthly? And how is this spiritual seed in us germinated? The aforementioned formula for becoming still is something much more fundamental than we usually imagine. In the Emerald Tablet, it is implied that the one God can be transferred to everyone, but needs mediation. And this is precisely about the silence inside us, this pure and virginal soil called Virgin Mary in the Christian mysteries, meaning pure matter, which conceives immaculately by the Holy Spirit. It is in this way that that which is above becomes the same as that which is below, to accomplish the miracles of the One. Today, the word Hermetic is used to define something that is airtight and locked. But Hermeticism gives us the universal key to the understanding of man and the world, and to the realization of God in the human being. And despite all the valuable formulations we can find in the mentioned texts, a sentence from another Hermetic work sums it all up in the following short triptych. Accept everything, give everything, and so renew everything. This is in fact the formula of life itself, while also containing the explanation of our own limitation. Man is fixed in his ideas of things, as well as in the idea of his own form. For this reason, his form ossifies and gradually becomes completely imperceptible to the movement of life's currents, and so, at some point, his body structure has to be destroyed. Much more essential, however, is his mental immobility, which in a sense is also part of the bodily structure. But if a psyche were to stand still before God, it would cease to impose itself and its criteria and would accept everything as it is. Since it has no concepts and desires, it ceases to retain life and psychic energy. Therefore, by virtue of natural necessity, it gives itself completely, just as the sun does. This emptying opens up a pure space that is filled by the naturalness of everything, by the very fundamental meaning, and on its basis, a new, up-to-date process is recreated, flexible, adaptable, and above all useful, as it is a manifestation of the spiritual design behind things. This is renewal. It is the natural image of life. A shadow of this is left in Homer's hymn to Hermes, where the ancient poet says that he was very changeable. Hermes is also the interpreter between the gods and men. May we also learn to better understand the language of Hermes, of the innermost voice. In this way, in the words of the Emerald Tablet, you receive the power of that which is above and that which is below. Thus, you will possess the glory of the whole universe, and therefore all darkness will flee from you.